I can't very well introduce myself, as that would be very egotistical and arrogant, because I'd be like, this guy is the greatest guy in biofeedback. So I figured what I would do is give it to somebody who has known my career throughout the extent of my career. I have no idea what he's going to say. It's likely not very flattering, as he's seen me at my worst. So I will give you Jeff Sutton to make my introduction.
And it's my profound pleasure to introduce to you somebody who needs no introduction.
And that could have been it.
Mic drop. I'll keep it short, but there are a lot of punctuations in a short introduction for Adam. Of course, everybody's met Adam because he's definitely one of the reasons why the industry still exists in the strength that it does today, given that he has been traveling around the world for 7 years now, and has, since we had less in school education going on at the academies, which really was put to rest approximately 2012. Really, Adam and a few friends that he's invited with him over the years have been almost single-handedly maintaining the communication in the industry on an in-person basis since then. So I think you deserve a lot of credit for that. Even prior to that, of course, Adam and his business partner Roger were both bulls in a china shop, very literally and figuratively, but they just had pretty profound ideas on what they could accomplish. And being the archetypical rebel, there really wasn't a boundary or rule that he wasn't willing to sort of break down. And so, as a result, he's gotten to know royal family members in Dubai and I believe Bahrain and Saudi, which must have been terrifying at times.
The Saudis were terrible. They showed up with the bodyguards and the guns.
And yet had some fantastic experiences with these people. I think one of them from Dubai was even an Olympic shooter, if I'm not mistaken. So, relationships have been made at the highest level by Adam and Roger, and of course they were the ones that created the entire China project in the first place. So they've been breaking boundaries ever since the beginning, and certainly he deserves a lot of credit for that. And he's been a lot of fun to work with in China. I was certainly the more cautious and uptight one, and he was the one that was willing to come into rooms full of doctors and think tanks that we had to give impromptu presentations to with people with 3 PhDs from 3 countries, and flip the tables over and grab their attention. And the project, obviously, according to our conversation the other day, is still continuing 10 years later. So here we are, again, thanks to an invitation from the guy and the Budapest team. Thank you for the invitation. And I'll give the floor back to Adam.
Do you remember the physicist? Remember the physicist? The meeting where we were in the sport hospital with the physicist that they brought in to challenge us?
It's a blur.
Literally, the Olympics was... thank you, Jeff. I love that, man. Literally, the Olympics was by far emotionally, mentally, physically, one of the most demanding experiences of my life. But like Jeff said, we were often put into these situations where we were sitting at tables, I'm a stoner from British Columbia, right? We were put in situations where we were across the table and being challenged by quantum physicists in China, where ultimately under attack, they were scrutinizing our fundamental premise. And I'll never forget Jeff and I sitting in a room with this one particular physicist. The guy had 3 or 4 different PhDs in physics. And he sat there for an hour, and Jeff and I had to sit there and just be scrutinized and take it as he took apart the premise. And in the end of his lecture, we were entitled to, in the end of his shtick, I'm so Jewish. In the end of his shtick at the table, we were invited for a rebuttal. We were to refute his points. And I remember it popped into my head so crystal clear that I understood that the only way I could have a conversation with this man was to quote him at his level. And I remember this so vividly. And I turned around and I said, "Are you aware of Einstein?" And he said, "What?" I said, "Are you aware of Einstein?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Was it not a fundamental Einstein principle that if we change the energy of something, we change the manifestation of its mass?" You remember that now, Jeff? Yeah. What happened next was the guy had egg all over his face. He shut up and he didn't say a thing for the rest of the meeting, at which point we were invited to continue our process in support of the Federal Sport Hospital in Beijing. And we were invited after that, because this was our pinnacle point of scrutiny on a preliminary introduction to the Federal Sport Hospital in Beijing. This was a preliminary hurdle, the last hurdle that we had to get over before we got our official invitation to work for 4 months leading to, up, and through the 2008 Beijing Olympics, where we were invited to work on the Chinese national team, and I mean the entire Chinese national team during the Beijing Olympics. Jeff and I tested every member of the competing national team in 2008 that were then led to competition. It was surreal. It was crazy. And it was one of the most beautiful times of my life, although not in the moment. In the moment, it sucked. It was wonderful. It was a huge contradiction because on the one hand, companies were offering millions of dollars to have access for a day or 2 days for what we had access to in respect to being able to apply a product. I mean, millions. Pepsi wanted millions to research certain things with the athletes coming. Like, when the show is in your house, as in 2008 Beijing Olympics were in Beijing, when the big show is in your house, everybody comes a knocking. It is surreal that we had that opportunity and that experience. Being submersed in it, we all literally had mental breakdown because we were pushed so hard, we worked so hard, and we were so out of our comfort zone. Jeff?
Yeah, it took weeks before we had permission to even work with the first athlete. And I remember the conversation with Dr. Lee when I kept bothering him. I said, the reason I'm here is I want to see what this thing will do with performance. And he just kept telling me, calm down, be careful what you ask for. And the first day that they showed up with athletes, a bus drove up and I had 48 tests in the first day.
48 tests. Do you know? So let me explain the premise. Not that this is an Olympic presentation, but for those of you who have never heard the story, what Jeff and I had to do was test, in that case, 48 people in a day. We were not allowed to ask them anything. No intake information at all. You would never ask any doctor to assess anything based upon the variables that we were given. It would never happen. We weren't allowed to ask medical history. We weren't allowed to use the demographic intake because the Chinese, not knowing us, were afraid that through the asking of those questions, we would create insecurity in the athlete and subsequently hinder performance. So when we tested 48 people, what that meant was the person came, we put them in the harness, we ran the test. At the end of the test, we copied the matrix Kinshasa file, took them off, next. So we couldn't even remotely identify a face or a feeling to the client that we were then later assessing in the evening as we didn't sleep. Like I said, 18 hours, 20 hours a day. It would take us, on average, 2 hours was our part to be able, once Jeff had refined our process, it would take us 2 hours to go through matrix data to come up with a report, draw conclusions to be able to present. And then, after we did all of that blind, what we would have to do every day was go into a board meeting with 12 doctors, 12 sport medicine federal sport doctors, best in the country. And we would have to issue reports, explain our findings, back up our findings, and present those reports directly to the doctors, at which point the doctors would then present the report to the team coach or the team leader. And if they found information pertinent, then they would then choose to share that with the athlete. But that's the 6 degrees of separation that we worked with whilst attempting to do something absolutely new that had never been done. It was extraordinary and crazy and wow. And I'm so glad you were there so that there's somebody that knows that I'm not full of shit. Yeah, buddy. I have pictures for you, just so you know. Yeah. Okay. So, super learning. I knew, first of all, please understand that I was asked to put this lecture together 3 days before arriving because there was an unfortunate circumstance where a few of our presenters from India were unable to attend. So I had 3 days to come up with a lecture, and I haven't done this for well over a year. Actually, about a year. Been in front of you, taught anything. I'm kind of rusty. I've been surfing. Surfing's really great. I kind of prefer it to sex. It's fantastic, and it's what I want to do with the rest of my life. But a friend had asked me a question, and the question was how to stimulate and ultimately accelerate speech development. I often get questions from practitioners, and I am hesitant to engage the conversation because it doesn't stop. You know, if I engage and I begin to offer answers, then it just more and more and more and more. And after teaching this for 15, 16 years, you get tired of hearing yourself talk. You know what I mean? Granted, what I have is great to say, but you get tired of hearing yourself talk. And so I came in and I looked at the schedule and I thought, oh my God, I have to attempt to teach after Dr. Drake and not come across as a buffoon, right? Which was a little intimidating because, you know, by far this woman is one of, you know, my favorite instructors, favorite educators, and her wealth of knowledge is just like, gah, right? I mean, that woman single-handedly challenged Health Canada to forward integrative, holistic understandings in medicine. And granted, if we had done all of that now, we're all so much wiser and smarter, we might have had different outcomes in tandem with the things that we were doing. But understand, everybody in this room is a pioneer. And most of the work that I have proposed over the years, as I've taken you through different lectures in regards to how to go about supporting specific things, has been my experience in the trenches. So rather than theoretical information, I've most often shared that which I've learned through trial and error. Today's lecture is a little more theoretical. And I'm super excited for your feedback once you begin to apply the premises and the principles that I'm going to share with you today. So, today we're talking about super learning. Anybody interested in super learning? Okay, good. So I didn't pick a bad topic. Wonderful. Okay, super learning. Let's start from the beginning. Super learning requires more than stimulation. The brain, like the body, must be supported, nurtured in its totality. Holism is the key. The reason I put this slide here was to ultimately precurse and say that never should we be jumping into stimulation, asking something to perform at a greater degree, if we have not precursively established the proper conditions to ask something to perform at a greater level. Meaning, if I take a toxic, deficient brain and I say, hey, I know you've been running a marathon and I know you're exhausted, but if you could do me a favor and run that marathon faster, even though you've got no resources, it's a pretty moot conversation. Do you understand what I mean? Meaning, before I ask any area of the body, a specific area, to move into a greater degree of performance, the first thing that I have to do is establish a healthy, nutrified, balanced, supportive environment. Does that make sense? Yes. So, for me, what that means, if you're not familiar with my work, for me, what that means is, at the very least, your clients should have detoxed, been through phase 1 and phase 2 fundamental healing and support before we ever get into what is considered a phase 3 stimulation, whereby I'm asking to something to operate better. So what is phase 1 in my model? Phase 1 is detoxification. The first thing that we have to do is take the crap out. And this is precursive before we even get into the brain. I need that liver, that kidney, that adrenal gland, the lymph system, the intestinal system. Those things need to be detoxified, supported, cleaned, nutrified. In phase 1, we're mainly talking about detox, but those things have had to happen precursively before we get into a specific area. We need the whole body to be functioning because, of course, once I get into a specific area, I'm going to follow the same model. Meaning, I've done the body in general through phase 1, which is detox, and then phase 2, which is nutrition. And then phase 3, which is a general stimulation, tonification of all body function in order to be able to support that which I'm going to further ask in a specific area for the body to do. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand what I mean? Are there any questions? So I do have a protocol series, if you're unfamiliar with my work, called the first 10 sessions. I'll make that available for your PDF downloads at no charge because I love you. Yes. The first 10 sessions takes you through a physical, emotional, mental detoxification. I have a friend. Does anybody know Deanna Stanley? Okay, Deanna Stanley. You know Deanna? Cool. I have a friend, Deanna Stanley. Deanna attended a bunch of my classes. Deanna opted to build her entire business around the first 10 sessions. She is now known as the detox lady of Great Bear Lake in Minnesota. Population 27,000 people. White Bear Lake, thank you. White Bear Lake. So you know Deanna. Perfect. When I met Deanna years ago, she was struggling. She'd had her device at that point for 5 or 10 years before I met her. But in attending my course, I gave her a systematic platform through phase 1, 2, and 3 understanding, as well as protocols which supported an established detox. She is now the detox lady of White Bear Lake. She sent me messages, and I'd show them to you, but I didn't take the pictures and put them into the slide. She sent me a message over Facebook the other day. And she said, Adam, can I tell you a secret? And I said, sure, Deanna, what's the secret? And then she disappeared for 5 minutes. Don't you hate when people do that? It's like, shit, you just totally left me hanging, right? I'm like, yes, tell me your secret, Deanna. And she said, the first secret is that I love you. And I'm like, isn't that nice? The second secret is that I made $10,000 this month. And I said, wow, that's super cool. She said, or 2 months ago, she said, in this month, I made $13,300. And I was like, wow, that's great, Deanna. I'm so proud of you. That's awesome. And she was a practitioner who had her device who couldn't make a living with it. At that point, though, and then the next line was, and this year I'm tracking to make over $100,000. She said, I could have never imagined. And that's all she said, right? Like, I made this, and this year I'm going to. So has anybody ever hit you like that on Facebook? You've never had anything like that come through Facebook? Well, I have. And every person that's ever approached me that way is about next to switch into a multi-level marketing pitch. You know what I'm saying? So you have had people pitch you like that on Facebook, right? Okay, so that's what I was expecting. And I said to Deanna, I love you dearly. You've supported me over the years, etc. And I'm super grateful, but I'm not interested in MLM marketing. I don't want to have a conversation about your amazing next MLM product. Please, thank you very much. I'm so happy for your success. It's wonderful, but I don't want to hear that. She came back and she said, no, Adam, I'm not selling any product. She said, that's just from the biofeedback. I said, what? She said, all I do is your first 10 sessions. That is what I do. My entire practice is based upon that. The results, she said, are extraordinary because, and understand this as a premise with all of your clients, most people in this room, we've been on the planet for like 22, 23, 25,000 days. Now, of the majority of the people that you meet, of those 25,000 days, how many of those days have been spent detoxing, you think, for the majority? 0? Maybe 2 days in 25,000 of a total lifetime? People don't know these things. Our clients don't know these things. Yes, you'll meet some people that are conscious, that have began learning and doing on their own, but the majority, they don't. And as a result of which, her working in this small town of 27,000 people up in the mountains in Minnesota where you know money's not flowing, she's now the detox lady of White Bear Lake, making over $100,000 a year applying this protocol. This was one of the most empowering, beautiful conversations that I've ever had that was supportive in reference to, holy shit, the work I have done has actually impacted. I have supported other people, and not just her $100,000, but how many people has she supported in helping? And I realized, because I was reluctant to even come when I was asked to be the master of ceremonies and teach a lecture, I've been out for a while, a little disenfranchised with all the politics and the bullshit, and I've really just wanted to surf. But I got this message from Deanna, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And of course, I had to eat a lot of shit for the whole, don't pitch me on an MLM thing, Deanna. So I was backpedaling. I'm really sorry. You're wonderful. You're so amazing. I'm so small. Like, I felt like I was in church. So please understand that before we get into asking a brain, a deficient, we know the reason we're focusing on super learning in this particular situation, because I really wanted to propose this from brain injury, but not standard brain injury. Like, I want to look at vaccine-related brain injury. I want to look at trauma-related brain injury. And then I think stroke is also something that I would consider as brain injury. So as I was asked to... and Jewish guilt. You got to love Jewish guilt, right? Jewish procrastination. As I was asked, could I support, how to support this by one of the practitioners. This is why you're getting this lecture. This actual lecture is really for an audience of one, but it applies to all of you. What I was asked was, how can I support and stimulate and accelerate speech development in autism? And autism wasn't my premise. Brain injury was, as I heard it. And right as the question was asked, a huge flag went off. Like, those moments of divine inspiration? That's what I had as I was asked the question. But all things considered, in truth, I didn't want to deal with the hour it was going to take to get down on the phone, explain the protocol, how I would go about it. And so in my stereotypical style, I procrastinated and I avoided. But at the same time, I felt guiltier and guiltier and guiltier for procrastinating and avoiding, because I'm Jewish and that's what we do. And in the interim, because I felt guilty about this, I kept getting a couple additional questions on top of it, at which point I felt totally compelled, because I'm feeling so guilty, to make sure I focus and answer these questions as they're coming in, while I'm still not resolving the first question that came in, which then has me feeling guilty, and now I'm answering all these questions, right? Typical Jewish process. And as a result of which, it in fact actually led to me up here sharing this lecture with you. But it was because as I was asked to think about, consider, open up my intuitive knowing to how to support this, I think I came up with something pretty profound. You're going to test drive my theory. Okay? So as we attempt to look at very specific super learning, in this case, my focus today is going to be speech development. However, this protocol can be applied to anything. Memory issues, any specific cognitive issue in tandem with the brain. What I'm going to share with you, as well as what these protocols that I'm going to give you within the next week, because I didn't have time to fully finish them, these protocols that will be available can be applied to any cognitive-related issue. Okay, if you want to stimulate and support the brain in super learning, be it your 14-year-old getting better grades in school, be it working with brain injury, at whatever level of the spectrum, this protocol, I believe, will be supportive for everyone. And how cool are my slides? Right? I did manage to put some time into this sucker. Asking a toxic brain to perform without first changing the environment which led to its dysfunction does not work. Detox is step one. And bear in mind, now I'm talking about specific detox of the brain itself, not generalized detox of the main elimination systems of the body. So at this point, what we have to start thinking about is how to go about specifically detoxing the brain. And for example, we want to do the brain generally in whole, but then if there are specific areas, so if we take speech center as an example, what do I want to focus on? What are the speech centers of the brain? Anybody? Anybody? Bueller, Bueller, Bueller. I want to focus on the frontal lobe. I want to focus on the amygdala. And I also want to focus, because language processing is in the amygdala, speech is in the Broca left portion of the frontal lobe. Oh my God, I know so much stuff. And I also want to support the temporal lobe, which is the emotional association with speech. So I want to support, in this premise, because I'm only right now talking about speech development, my focus is going to be the detoxification. Remember, the brain has already been detoxed generally. So because my focus is speech development, I'm going to focus on the amygdala, the left frontal lobe, and you can specify, as I will show you in your protocol, the Broca region of the left frontal lobe, the amygdala, and the temporal lobe. So we're going to get into very specific detox to support the centers that we're looking to stimulate. Does that make sense? Yes. Gracias, amor. Our society, environment, food, and medicine are toxic. It is impossible to escape toxicity in the 21st century. At best, we can hope to manage it. Would you say that's a fairly apt statement today? Right? How do you avoid toxicity in the world today? You simply can't. So I don't care how clean you are, how many raw, organic, unsalted almonds you eat for breakfast. The reality is you cannot escape the toxicity of the industrial petroleum age. You are infiltrated. We are infiltrated. The main toxins that affect the brain are heavy metals. Heavy metals can cause broad spectrum of brain-related diseases, including autism, Alzheimer's, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and neurodevelopment diseases. Monosodium glutamate. That's actually the reason I bought this device, was MSG, just in case you didn't know. I was living in China. I woke up like this. I couldn't turn my head. My aunt, my wife's aunt, bought a device, scanned me from Canada to China. I told her nothing, not even that my neck was a problem. She came back and said, your neck's a problem. It associates to monosodium glutamate toxicity of your liver and gallbladder. I did acupuncture. I worked on it. I woke up the next morning. I had full mobility in my neck. This was after a month of seeing chiropractors, acupuncturists, etc. MSG is a neurotoxin. It is nasty. And more than a neurotoxin, it also destroys the liver and the gallbladder meridian's ability to regulate and send energy through, up into, and through the brain. So MSG is a nasty one. Stay away from garbage Chinese restaurants. Fluoride. Well, if you drink water out of the tap, and I would say most of you likely don't, however, a vast majority of your clients absolutely most certainly do. And it isn't a matter of just what you drink. Do you shower? Anybody here take showers? I couldn't tell today. I mean, there's an interesting quote from Adolf Hitler being quoted by a Jew. And that quote was, if you want to control a race, if you want to control a people, fluoridate their water. Fluoride is a neurotoxin that stimulates docile complacency in people. And why would you want a docile, complacent populace? So that guys like Donald Trump could run your country. Ba-dum-boom. I'm Canadian. We have Justin Trudeau. He's pretty. He's legalized marijuana. And he's in the process of doubling our national debt. We love him. Okay, so fluoride lowers IQ levels in humans linked to learning and memory impairment, fetal brain damage, and altered neurobehavioral function. Artificial sweeteners, anybody that's drinking Coke, Diet Coke, Coke Zero, anybody that's putting a mint in their mouth, Trident gum, virtually most things out there that are sweetened at this point, other than that which rocks sugar, and it's amazing to think, oh, I really want the one with sugar, considering it's an immunosuppressant. It's like a choice of which evil do you want to play with, right? However, artificial sweeteners are nasty neurotoxins that shut down brain development. And understand, even if you're dealing with a brain injury, somebody that's been in a car accident, you're dealing with someone who has had a stroke. This is the precursive environment which created the susceptibility and the weakness, which then led to the symptom that it is you're trying to manage. Does that make sense? Right? And so understand, even though these things may not have seemed the toxic catalyst which have created the dysfunction, they most certainly have created the environment to support the breakdown in dysfunction. Does that make sense? Good. Next, and I don't think anybody in this room is unfamiliar, however, vaccine-related brain damage is present in most people in this room. That's right, I called you brain damaged. Why? Because your brains have been damaged. We are of the generation that was vaccinated. We did not know to question vaccine, and if you were one of the lucky ones who had an amazingly brilliant parent or religious associations whereby you didn't end up brain damaged, I saw you stroke your mom there. That's lovely. But here's the thing. Were you vaccinated? Twice. And it's great. Only twice. As compared to the vaccine programs running right now for children, which would dictate before they're 10 or 12, 65 vaccines in this country? Is that not correct? What? Louder? What? Is that correct? Oh, you've upped it an extra 5. The Rockefellers are going to be so happy. Here's the thing, and I realized this the other day. I know people whom have children that are autistic that were not vaccinated. Anybody else? Right? And you'd think, stereotypically, you go to you weren't vaccinated. And at which point we disassociate, well, then it must not be vaccine-related autism. Maybe this is an additional or a different catalyst. But here's the thing. This is the third or the fourth generation of children being born of a vaccinated populace. Is that not correct? Right? There is a genetic accumulation that's been happening from you to them, or from your parents to you, from you to your children. So even though our children haven't necessarily, many of them, not been vaccinated and still developing autism, I would argue that that is still vaccine-related autism because we have been genetically altered. Gail's shaking her head. Let's not say autism, but vaccine-related brain damage. How's that? Damage to the brain. Gail?
What you can't explain by that is the autism before the vaccines.
No, but that's you mean the early autism. Oh. How brief? Okay.
What autism is a genetic vulnerability to a virus or viruses based directly on ancestral exposure to that virus. Plus, you have to have both, exposure to the virus either during gestation or infancy. So it is either met in the environment, which it can be and was before the vaccines, and that's why we had autism before vaccines. And the vaccines have just raised the numbers because now, before it was an accident, you got it. Now, you can't miss it because we're sticking them all in.
Perfecto. But remember, what is a vaccine? A vaccine is living pathogen that we're shooting into people. So we're still talking about viral pathogen. And the point is that viral pathogen that they're using amidst the vaccine, which has stimulated, plus the whole other cocktail of heavy metals and nastiness, which has vastly increased the rate of autism because it's exposure to the same type of virus and conditions that Gail was just outlining. The vast increase in rate of autism can't not be understood as vaccine related or vaccine increased. I love you, Gail. Thank you very much. Yes. Absolutely, we know that we're the question was, thank you. The question was, is it possible that it's, even if we have not been vaccinated, is it possible that it's coming through the food supply? The answer is yes. But understand also the premise of vaccine. What is the premise of vaccine? Is it a micro model or a macro model? They propose it as a macro model, right? So understand, there's an energetic miasmatic element that's also playing out in resonance from being next to your husband, whom has also been vaccinated, whereby you're taking on that resonance and subsequently prompting the same dysfunction. Yes. Does that make sense? So I believe food certainly, of course, is a factor, but also there is an energetic resonance whereby at the macro level, because the majority is vaccinated, that's their entire premise, right, as they attack anti-vaccine, is that it's about the majority in the populace is what's key, and therefore I'm creating volatility by not doing that with my children. That's the Elizabeth McCarthy, or Melissa McCarthy, right? Yeah. Yes? Another factor that
A young doctor that works for the FDA made a public statement here in the U.S. that
Oh yeah, there's been some crazy stuff happening for sure in this country, because that's big business. But ultimately, yes, Ken, I'm about to repeat it. The statement was that there's also exposure via someone who has been vaccinated, which is not resonant but also physical through the likes of sweat, saliva, etc., whereby a lot of that pathogen is transferred homeopathically, miasmatically, physiologically, in such a way whereby we're creating the same dysfunctions and the same breakdowns. So we're good on the vaccine piece now? Excellent. Understand that it isn't, even in the situations where a parent hasn't been vaccinated, most often their parent has, but there's exposure everywhere. I have another premise with autism also, meaning a greater understanding, which is that these are rainbow crystal children that are incarnating to take us out of being slaves in Egypt, and we don't know how to not be slaves in Egypt because we're slaves in Egypt, sort of why we had to wander the desert for 40 years before we totally smote all the giants in Canaan. And I'm not religious at all. But the point is, we needed a new generation to come in to guide the way, because I didn't know how to not be a slave if I was a slave, and these autistic children coming in are here to teach us something. And I would imagine that the power structure, which holds power, manages power as it exists, doesn't want that message coming through those children, so let's vaccinate 70 times and most likely we'll shut down the messages. That's also been my out there premise, but in my own thing, but maybe not. Who knows? Anyway, so we've got to focus on the damage done by vaccine, the heavy metals, the nasty viral pathogens that they're playing with, etc. And these need to be considered as part of our detoxification as we're moving into specific areas. And remember, we would have initially first supported detox in the brain generally, but in this case, as a premise, we're focused on accelerating speech development. So we would be focused on vaccine detox as it applied to the amygdala, the frontal lobe, and the temporal lobe. Getting the toxic metals out is paramount. Before I can ask something to heal, I've got to pull the sliver out. If the sliver stays in, there is no healing. We need chelation therapy. Now, with chelation therapy, however, again, going back to my initial premise, if the body has not initially been properly supported, detoxed, and nutrified, general chelation has not been supported as part of that detox, then if we move into a specific area and really look to detox and dump a huge amount of toxicity as burden to the rest of the body for the purpose of elimination, if we've not done ample preparation before that, then we just create greater burden to the body. If the body hasn't first been detoxed so that its areas of elimination are functioning properly, as well as supported, nutrified with proper trace minerals put in so that when we do go about very specific chelation, there's something for those metals to bind to, then all we're doing is pulling toxins, metals that have adapted into tissue out, forcing the body to go through a process of adaptation again, just so that they can be stored back into the same tissues, if not others, causing greater dysfunction and damage. So please understand, as I'm proposing not general super learning, but very specific super learning for the purpose of enhancing fundamental function in the brain, it requires a whole bunch of precursive work before you would go into a specific area of deficiency and ask it to perform at a greater level. Chemical and metal toxicities are not the only points of toxic consideration. Make certain that parasites have been addressed. There is nobody I know that is a greater authority on how to address parasitic toxicity than that amazing woman at the back of the room, and the effects that it has on the body, how it leaches all your zinc, how it leaches all your copper, and if I don't have enough zinc, I have a shrinky dink. That's what Deb taught me. it's not working properly. And clearly that's my only motive in life, is my favorite toy. So I'm now taking mad zinc. Thank you, Deb Drake. And copper. What's crazy about this slide is that is a human brain. And those are actual parasites. And you know, it's funny, like as I was putting this together, and I've heard Deb's lectures over the years, and, you know, been like, yeah, sure, Deb, parasites. Yeah. When I put this part together and I looked online at pictures of the damage done to sarcoidal tissue from parasites, the conversation Deb's been screaming about for the last 10 years, 15 years. Go to Google, type in brain parasite picture, and click on images. Make sure you have an empty stomach. Trust me on that one. So we have to also not only consider the chemical toxicity and the physical toxicities, we also have to consider the organism-based toxicities such as parasites and other forms of microorganism. And they need to be addressed very specifically as well. And then often, so many of us forget the toxic emotional traumas which are stored in specific centers. And so further, our detox is not chemical, is not metal, is not just parasitic, but we also have to think about how to support the emotional detoxification within the amygdala, within the Broca portion of the left frontal lobe, the speech center of the brain in this premise as we're working on speech, as well as the temporal lobe, whereby we're processing emotionally the speech that's coming out. So we need to then think about how to go about challenging through our device. And it's amazing because with our device, we have such a special opportunity, for example, to take the amygdala in the main matrix, challenge it against the flower essences, and see what is the emotional clearing, what is the emotional detox required for this. We can do that with the flower essences, the Bach flowers, the emotions. My favorite remedies to use, especially emotionally and spiritually in the device, are the liquid light healing arts frequencies. Has anybody seen those suckers? Yes, they are in the Quest 9. The liquid light healing frequencies. The question was, do we have those frequencies in the Quest 9? And of course, yes, all the healing arts work is in there. How many of you were a part of the Quantum Clarity Tour when Jackie and I were actually teaching the liquid light healing art stuff? Put your hands up so I can see. How profound was that work for you when we did it? Wasn't it amazing? Do you recall the emotional releases that we got? Like total paradigm realignments of understanding on the spiritual, etheric, and purpose path level of our lives where we had gone wrong, bringing it up to the surface and supporting release. They are by far my favorite remedies that have been included in the device, and I've worked extensively with those people. So I can take those remedies, challenge them against specific areas of the brain, and find out what is needed to clear. And not just there, we can do things like go into NLP and Mental Factors Emotions Flowchart, using that program slightly differently. You know where the emotions and the neurotransmitters are before you click unconscious reactivity? And I'm going to show this. This is all going to be in my protocols. But theoretically, what I can do is go into unconscious reactivity, having set amygdala as my area of issue or my emotion, because really everything in perception is an emotion because we don't exist. And I can challenge amygdala against unconscious reactivity and look at the specific trauma and the trauma age, the trauma time, how that was stored, how that's stored in toxicity, and cross-correlate into homeotoxicology. So I can take physical, mental, emotional crossover through the likes of trauma and work to detox it. Now, after I have detoxed the brain chemically, physically, emotionally, mentally, at this point, I'm ready to slip into phase 2. Isn't that a great slide? Yeah. At this point, I'm able to move into support, because I've taken the shit out. One of the things people like to say is, I always nutrify first. Well, my experience is most people, their bodies, their constitutions are operating like a waste basket and a waste can. They're toxic, they're disgusting, they're dirty, and I don't mean the people, I mean the inside toxic elements of their body. They're under load and burden. And if I take $2,000 worth of supplements and I put them into that toxic body, I'm taking $2,000 worth of supplements and I'm tossing it into the trash. For me, general nutrification needs to be a part, like trace minerals, etc., needs to be a part of phase 1 where I'm detoxing. But if I were to attempt to hit that person with a huge amount of like nootropics and things like that, they're not going to be effective because the brain is toxic, the body's toxic. Unless I first pull the slivers out, I can't put the good shit in. Hence, phase 1 is take the shit out. Phase 2 is put the shit back in. The good shit. Hey man, that's really good shit. And now we can actually even do the same thing. We can come into vitamins in the matrix, take amygdala, take temporal lobe, take frontal lobe, and challenge it against vitamins and find out what does it specifically need. Because remember, we've already supported the general needs of the body as a precursor to ever being anywhere near this work. I can challenge the vitamins. I can challenge the amino acids, the fatty acids. And remember how important the fatty acids are, please. Your brain is fat. So if somebody calls you fathead, say thank you. Yeah, right? Me too. Me too, I hope so. And seriously, the total answer to cholesterol is to cut fats completely out of the diet because that's just the greatest thing you can do for the body. Are you kidding me? Like, Lipitor is absolutely, I think, a fundamental nutrient of the body. Does anybody agree? No? Oh, Pfizer's going to be really pissed. You know, a couple of years back, Pfizer had tried to actually petition for any person over 30 to be mandatorily prescribed Lipitor. Yeah, they actually had a lobby for that. Isn't that nuts? When I lived in China, this was crazy. My main office was in a 5-star hotel where Pfizer once a week would come into the hotel and they would have a lecture for their reps. And I stole one of their manuals once. I went into the room and I pulled out a manual. And I saw some of the products, which are probably now on the market because I haven't been back. But one of the things that I saw was Pepsi Up. Do you know what Pepsi Up was? Viagra put into Pepsi for the purpose of Pepsi Up. Isn't that nuts? Like, these companies are petitioning to get their products into your food supply. It is atrocious. It is atrocious. So we have to get the good shit in. Now, as we're talking about fortification, and this is before we even move into stimulation, as we talk about fortification, we need to balance and support healthy central nervous and autonomic nervous system functions that ultimately regulate every function of the body. My work with heart rate variability showed me something extraordinary. And what that was people mostly think that in the autonomic nervous system that there's, in fact, only 2 main mechanisms. There's sympathetic or the parasympathetic. It is absolutely incorrect. There is a third function of the autonomic nervous system in how it centralizes regulation, and it is important to understand this because anybody with PTSD, OCD, or any major health-related issue, chronic fatigue, whatever have you, if you have the proper tool to be able to measure, generally under heart rate variability, the proper heart rate variability, what you'll be able to do is actually see how the body is centralizing its regulation. Over here on the right, we have the autonomic nervous system. And within the autonomic nervous system, we have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nerves. Sympathetic is fight or flight. Parasympathetic is relaxation. However, our society, our stimuli, is so out of balance. And understand, you are a creature of the cavemen, and you are far more caveman than you are human. Or Homo sapien, not human, but Homo sapien. My point is, your body existed in a certain way for about 5,000 years, depending on your, or 50 or 100,000 years, depending on your historic model, if you go religion or the other way, science. But it has only been in the last 100 years that you have been exposed to petrochemical industrial toxicity. So your body is learning new tricks at a rate that it really never did throughout its entire history. On top of that, we're sitting now for our relaxation in front of 8,000 frames per second, designed to put us and keep us in an imbalanced theta, so that when you're talking to your husband and he's watching the game or television, it's like talking to the wall, right? He's in a meditative state. What did they used to call TV? Like when you'd flip through the TV guide, what did they call that? Sorry? No. What? They called it programming. They could not have been more accurate. So for my relaxation at the end of the day now, I'm watching Die Hard. Buildings are, no, that's not me, but I'm talking about the general, right? Buildings are exploding. Guns and machine gun fire are going off. All of this while I'm in a theta consciousness state at 8,000 frames per second and a flicker rate, stimulating me into an imbalanced, suggestible theta. And why do they want me there? So they can sell me, look, Madge, I soaked in it. Right? And I'm like, okay, I need to get me some palm olive. But now back to my regular scheduled sympathetic dominance of, dodge that bullet. My nervous system doesn't know the difference. So in the last 60, 70 years of television, our means of relaxation has our autonomic nervous systems and central nervous systems completely screwed. So I was explaining the index of centralization. Over here, we have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nerves. Relaxation or fight or flight. When that mechanism breaks, like from PTSD, major trauma, etc., and really so many of us are just traumatized by watching the bloody television. When that mechanism breaks, the body kicks in its protection mechanism, and that means the autonomic nervous system actually goes offline. The central nervous system comes online and starts to pick up regulation for the body. But the difference between the two is that the autonomic nervous system is like a text messaging conversation with your kid. It's a fluid conversation, it's back and forth, it's auto-correcting, it's supporting the needs of, if he needs to be home by 5 o'clock, you know it and quick, right? Now the central nervous system and how it manages the body regulation is more operating like snail mail. It's backup systems on. It's life preservation. But there is no regeneration or healing when we're centralized into the central nervous system rather than the autonomic nervous system, which should be regulating, self-regulating, auto-correcting to the environmental demands and needs of the body. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? So then as we move into asking a deficient brain that's under stress and that's toxic, that has not been amply supported, regulated by a central and an autonomic nervous system, we have to bring those into balance, and that's why we're in phase 2, where we're nutrifying, supporting, loving, caring for. We have to bring that autonomic nervous system back into balance as well. And for anybody that doesn't know how to do that, I have written some great protocols. How many of you use the startup procedure, my startup procedure in your sessions? Put your hands up. Come on, actually up so I can see. Really? Screw you all. I'm done. Leave it. So how many of you have been to my classes? Put your hands up. Oh, all right. So I forgive the rest of you. Okay, I have a startup protocol which is designed fundamentally to support a shift into the autonomic nervous system, or a shift into the parasympathetic nervous system at the beginning of a session. Because if you're just getting in, jumping into short sarcodes, mineralization, a lot of the standard stuff that was taught via the standard education, then you're not really supporting your client. The first thing that needs to happen in your session, general session, not even just this one, but a general session, when your client comes in, understand they've been racing traffic, they've had to write into their schedule book what time to get to your office, they're thinking about what time they have to pick up the kids. These people are not coming in going, hey man, I'm so excited for my quantum biofeedback today, I just feel so good, I want to feel better. How many of your clients are coming in like that? Exactly, they're coming in under stress, which means they're in a beta predominant, sympathetic dominant state. So the first thing that needs to happen in a session is I need to switch that autonomic nervous system out of sympathetic dominance into parasympathetic. At the same time, a lot of people forget, because it wasn't taught in association, there's in fact a series of brainwave speeds which directly correlate to an increase in the parasympathetic nerves. Who can tell me what the brainwave speeds that associate to parasympathetic states are? There are two. Alpha and theta. Alpha wave speed and theta wave speeds in the brain are the brain waves of parasympathetic relaxation. So I need to shift the autonomic nervous system. I need to support the central nervous system, as Dr. Drake was saying earlier, and I need to support the brain primarily. Like, imagine doing surgery on someone while they were completely focused and awake, and you're going to open up their brains and do brain surgery. No anesthetic, no Jacob's ladder. Just, hey, Maximino, come here. Let me get out my saw. I cut open your head. I start to mess around in your skull. No. First thing I have to do is take him down those levels of consciousness whereby he's open and willing to receive change. These are paramount and fundamental. This is required at the micro and the macro. So when we're working the body in general for any other issue, the first thing that has to happen always in a session is now in my work, maybe because I think I'm a Virgo rising, ultimately I sacrifice compassion for efficiency. And I really got sick of listening to my clients be perpetual victims. Oh, it's so bad. It hurts so much. He's such a bastard. All of it. I mean, you know, you've worked in this field. You've heard it all, right? So I don't abide that shit anymore. When my client comes in, I put them, after the test is complete, into binaural beat music, which supports that brainwave speed that I'm talking about. I don't want to listen to their victim paradigm. There is a time for coaching and counseling with my client, but it is not while I'm running my therapies. While I'm running my therapies, what I want is that person to be in the most relaxed state possible, because the more relaxed and open they are, the better they're going to have the capacity to receive the stimulation of a session. Does that make sense? Perfect. 90% of the stimulation and nutrition to the brain is generated by the movement of the spine. So like Deb said earlier in her lecture, and as I'm sharing in mine, it is fundamental if we're talking about brain support, brain health, tri-vector therapy, autonomic nervous system balancing. These are fundamental, precursive, before we can ask a deficient toxic, or, well, no longer is it toxic, now it's just deficient, before we can ask a deficient organ to operate at a much greater degree for us. Exercise plays a key role in step 2. Step 2 is phase 2. Phase 2 is nutrifying, balancing, and supporting. The brain needs oxygen. Increase in exercise increases oxygen, very obviously. Where O2 flows, healing goes. So the reason I put this here, because this is kind of obvious and cliche, right? Everybody has a general premise that oxygen is a good thing. Other than when I'm pounding the cigarettes, I seem to miss that. But yeah, oxygen's required. It's important. Why I put this in is because of this. Blood and hormones also play a key role. Now, Jaquita, I told you I was going to source you out. Or whatchamacallit you out, single you out. Jaquita, put up your hand. Awesome. Jaquita Handy, at the back, does a lot of work with children with ADD, ADHD, children in development, as well as children with autism. And I first met her at a conference in Newbern, Newbern, North Carolina, where she was speaking to autism at a brain-based wellness conference. Some of you familiar with Dr. Patrick Porter, yeah, who's not an actual doctor, just putting that out there. Anyway, his information, Patrick has a really beautiful and great in-depth understanding of brain dynamics, neuroplasticity, etc. He's a interesting, charismatic cat. I'll just leave that there. But I met Jaquita there. I don't think she liked me when she first met me, in truth. But later, I think she became aware of the work that I do in biofeedback. And I think, did you attend my ADD, ADHD class? You did. Awesome. So I taught a class, 3 years ago? 3 years ago about supporting ADD, ADHD. The major premise of that was, for me anyway, what I enjoyed most about teaching that class was understanding the emotional conflict which cross-correlated to the behavior. So, for example, in ADD, we were dealing with a separation conflict. In ADHD, we were dealing with a separation conflict with a motor conflict, and how to go about supporting the release of those conflicts in tandem with a series of protocols to support greater balance with working with those children. Now, on that tour, as filler, I also had included my performance enhancement work. And my performance enhancement work, which went back to the Olympics, where I was literally digitally doping Chinese national Olympic athletes for competition. And what was exciting about that, like I said the other day, was we proved biochemically quantitative increases up to 1,000% in human growth hormone in 2 weeks. Through the athletes and the measure of performance, every single one of the girls on the women's swim team who were not expected to medal increased their personal best times in practice. And your competition time is always faster, but they beat their competition times in practice. It doesn't happen. These women who weren't expected to medal brought home 8 or 12 gold medals. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I've thought it and talked about that. But it was extraordinary what we saw, what could happen if we applied hormone streaming, as they later ultimately titled my work, thank you, Desi, and attempted to build off of it. I taught the performance enhancement at the request of other practitioners for that tour, really in truth, as part of filler. So Jaquita asked me, this is where my lecture today is coming from, Jaquita asked me, how do we stimulate acceleration in speech development in brain injury? Particularly her focus was autism. And she was telling me that she was having great effect using my protocols. And I was like, that's awesome. But then she told me which protocol she was using. Bless you. And one of the things that she was doing, to my surprise and initial dismay, was that she was using my performance protocol for sports athletes on autistic children. Now, what I know about using testosterone and growth hormone in stimulation of athletes is that, yes, their performance increased, but everything else I expected to see also was present, meaning acne was developing, aggravated moods was developing, difficulty in menstruation because I was working on women, stimulating testosterone, menstrual problems were developing. The Chinese didn't care because they were fast. But these sweet little nice Chinese girls in a month of this program turned into the most vile little, I won't say the word, that you could imagine. But at the same time, they were fast. So, between everything we were in observation of, as well as having the biochemical markers to support, the work was good. It wasn't necessarily ethical, but the work was good. Well, Jaquita listed out all the things that she'd been doing with these kids, and my sport performance was in the list, and I looked and I was like, oh shit, maybe I didn't articulate that well enough because that wasn't supposed to happen. But in my investigation of the cause and effect of the application of that work with Jaquita, what I would have expected was quite the opposite. She found through her work, and I imagine it was with more than one person, right? Yeah, 3 years you've been doing that. Since January, so just over a year, or under a year. And how many people have you done it with? $33 treatments a week. And how many have you exposed to specifically the performance enhancement, would you say? Roughly. Okay, 33. Awesome that we're like rocking the Christ consciousness master number on that one. So clearly something right is in the house because that's the number, right? Not that I'm a metaphysical, but I'm totally a metaphysical, but don't tell anybody. Anyway, I asked right off the bat, were they more aggressive? Like, is everything okay? Jaquita's answer was no, they're calmer. No, they're calmer, and things are developing in profound ways. It was the opposite. Well, there's a reason why this slide is showing here, correct? And certainly a possibility. My hypothesis is this, and it's a hypothesis. My hypothesis is do you know why you stimulate testosterone in athletes? Do you know what it actually does? What? No. It increases red blood cell development. By stimulating testosterone, you increase red blood cell development. By increasing red blood cell development, you increase oxygen uptake. By increasing oxygen uptake in performance, when muscles are expanding and contracting in sport, you have a much greater explosion. It's like adding more air into your motor or into a fire. You open the door in a fire, what happens? It goes, right? Same thing. Exact same thing. So it was super interesting because, the questions start reeling like, wow, is there poor oxygenation inherent in these children? Is there low red blood cells? I would love to know. Is there low oxygenation saturation? I would love to know. But certainly the findings are interesting and worth investigating because I was shocked and I would have expected it to go completely the other way. Completely the other way. So blood and hormones play a part, and it would seem by increasing, and again, I would advocate this cautiously, but it would seem that by increasing testosterone and growth hormone for injury repair, because that's also a part of it, by increasing testosterone and growth hormone, we're increasing oxygenation and subsequently regeneration. And amazingly, we're not seeing the aggression or the other types of symptoms, which is negative symptoms, which associate through the increase of testosterone. So it'd be interesting to do a study to find out if the testosterone is low inherently in these children. So many questions. Deb's head is going, wow, yeah, exactly, right? I mean, it was completely what I wouldn't have expected, and then the questions start coming, The brain starts thinking and working. So it would appear that increasing testosterone and growth hormone, subsequently increasing oxygenation and regeneration potential, is a good thing. Now, as we're talking about specific brain-based support, how many of you have heard of nootropics? Nootropics. Some people call it nootropic, nootropic, but it's nootropic ultimately. And pronunciation really doesn't fucking matter. How many of you saw the movie Limitless? You saw the movie Limitless? What was Limitless? It was the smart pill, right? That's in essence what nootropics are. Nootropics are smart pills. Now, it's really important. You'll notice here I say they must be researched before usage. A lot of them out there are, in fact, just stimulants which will exhaust the body. Initially, you'll get like meth or speed. Whoa, man, I'm really dialed in, until your teeth start falling out from nutrient deficiency and how they're exhausting your body and bleeding out areas of the brain. So investigating a really good nootropic is certainly something to do. But again, I wouldn't be using expensive supplements like this in a toxic brain. First thing I have to do is detox it and support it. And then I can even move into very specific forms of don't leave, Mike. Very specific forms of supplementation designed to target and support the brain itself. So this is something to also consider after doing apt research. For anybody who wants to know more about it, talk to Kathy Bliss. Kathy Bliss. Kathy, stand up for a second. Kathy Bliss. If you don't know her name, it's Kathy Bliss. I imagine she's blissful, and maybe even the experience of being with her is blissful. Who knows? Bill knows. Kathy Bliss's son have been formulating nootropics for the last 5 years. A particular one called Qualicum. I think there's 1 or 2 or 3 stages to the thing. And if you think that my brain is working well right now, thank you, Kathy Bliss, because I said, can I please have some of those before I go on, because my brain feels like a rusty machine. And they work. So Qualia, I think, is what the product, hers is called. And you can ask Kathy about that stuff at the break. Cool? All right, so thus far, have I blown you away yet? Has anything been like, oh my God, Adam? Nothing really, right? It's been pretty standard so far. Is that my style of lecture? No. So something's missing in this whole formula, right? I haven't danced, and I'm not wearing a skirt. But ultimately, what I want you to understand is when that brain is clean and nutritionally supported, you'll be amazed at the changes you see, and that's even before we move into step 3, which is stimulation. Now, we've done our precursive work. Are you ready to see what I think is required in order to support the brain in developing new pathways and dissolving old broken pathways? All right. Did we just take a drastic left turn? All the way back to the and actually it was just last weekend for me. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. Stimulating the brain. I am not about to advocate drug use, or am I? If we are to support the brain in achieving big changes, then we need to shake up the environment. Now, before we move any further, I'm absolutely not advocating that you give autistic children LSD, mushrooms, DMT, ayahuasca, or psilocybin. That is not my premise. But my premise is we do have those frequencies built into the device. And I am in the process right now of designing two things. A nootropic nutritional stimulation stream. It will be available in your next software update. And I am in the process of designing a pathway enhancing stream, which will be a combination of ayahuasca, DMT, LSD, psilocybin, given in frequency for the purpose of stimulating the brain. Now, how many of you are aware of the research over the last 5 years that has gone into psilocybin? It's been funded through Silicon Valley by the guy who started PayPal, Thiel, right? Now, this research has been done at Johns Hopkins University and NYU. So the source of this information is sound. And I'm not up here being the rebel. Well, yes, I am the rebel. And I've been attempting and playing and learning from these things since I was 13 years old in my first Grateful Dead concert, which then led to military school, but that's a whole other conversation. And yes, I did just put magic mushrooms up on the stage. Okay. Connections. Please watch this. Let's make sure I have volume. There we go. Understand what that is. That's neural connectivity. Yes. So a huge amount of money and research has been going into looking at psychedelia and how it can be applied medically for the purpose of supporting neuroplasticity and healthy brain and emotional function. Now, what's super interesting about what you just saw, and maybe most of you missed it, we'll play it really quickly. Whoops. We'll play it really quickly once again. And I'll pause it here. Read what it says on the right. Dissolving fixed networks and creating new communication pathways. Even in talking with Gail earlier yesterday, what she was explaining was there is no issue of brain function in tandem with children with autism. What there is a giant wall that disconnects their ability from being able to connect from here to here. Well, I propose a nuclear missile to break down the wall. And that is my premise here. And again, not the advocation of giving them this, but the dissolving of fixed networks and the creating of new communication pathways. So fundamental. Now, you'll see through the rest of my information here what they're mainly talking about and focused on right now, because the research is in its early inception. Thus far, they've looked at addiction, and they've studied addiction, and the results are profound. Like people that are alcoholics, heroin addicts, coke addicts, they get off that stuff permanently through the use of properly regimented, regulated, cared for use with psychedelia. Particularly LSD, I think, is the one that has been most studied in respect to addiction. Psilocybin seems to be the one that they're most researching in respect to anxiety, depression, and neuroses. Okay? So what we need to do is we need to reestablish and support the growth of new pathways and the usage of these herbs, these medicinal sacred herbs that have been used for thousands of years medicinally by the ancient cultures who knew a hell of a lot more than we do. That is what they do. They break down old networks and they start and support the building of new pathways. So what we have to do is ultimately break through. We have to destroy and dissolve the old pathways which are not supporting. And again, this is not specific for autism. This is for brain injury, such as vaccine-related brain injury, stroke. Sorry? What was that? PTSD, concussion, any brain-related. I mean, how many of you have known anybody with a TBI, traumatic brain injury? Did you have difficulty in speech after your TBI? Only for 5. Oh, so it was just fine. Would it have been nice had that been able to be healed and accelerated in support of? Does it make sense that if we dissolve the old pathways and support the growth of new ones, connecting areas of the brain which are otherwise not connected, does it stand to reason that therein rests the ability for you to get from A to Z in hyperspeed? It absolutely does. That's what I see. That's what I see. So what if? Wow. John Hopkins and NYU. I'm not fucking around up here. Excuse my language. What happened to the other 20%? Oh, a lot of them thought they were Jesus, walked on water and sank. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It's a good question. What happened to the other 20%? But, let's not worry about them because 80% got better. As somebody, I know, right away here, as someone whom has had considerable experience as a result of 300 plus Grateful Dead concerts, if you know who the Grateful Dead were. 300 plus Grateful Dead concerts, working in Mexico with shamans, my own psychonaut experimentation. As to the other 20% in my experience, Clay, psychedelia is not always a comfortable experience. It is by no means recreation. It has, unfortunately, Mike and I were talking earlier about how abuse in recreation without ample regulation has led to a lot of incorrect information as it applies to these things. You know, for example, because we've made them illegal and not available to our population, we don't regulate what's in stuff, what dosages, specifically in the chemical ones like LSD, etc. I mean, as far as psilocybin goes, granted, I have no idea what these mushrooms are going to do compared to these, but I'm certainly interested to find out. The point is here, I have met people whom have gotten stuck. Psychedelia really takes you on a tour through your chakras in an intimate way that cannot be described. It fractures your delusion of self, like that one slide said, where he said, I suddenly became aware that all of my anxieties were completely unnecessary. I can tell you about my first experience. I'm at a Grateful Dead concert. I'm 13 years old. Somehow I've talked my mother into letting me get on a bus with a 15-year-old kid that's a buddy of mine. We're leaving from Toronto to go to Michigan over a border. I don't know how I sold that one, but somehow I got Mom to agree, and I went to this concert. I ran into my summer camp counselor, and I was looking for herbal satisfaction of the green nature, which is legal here. So I was looking for weed, and I was 13. I just started smoking for the first time. I think I'd smoked 1 or 2 joints in my life at that point, and it was my mother's. But but I got to the concert, and I couldn't find any weed. And my summer camp counselor said, hey, man, I've got this acid. I said, what's that? He said, it's acid. You put it on your tongue. I'm like, you want me to put acid on my tongue? Isn't it going to burn? He's like, no, just put it on your tongue. It'll be fine. Okay, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, nothing happened. I thought, this is bunk. Then my ice cubes started chewing as though they were Jell-O. There was no more crunch. And I'm looking at all these weird hippie guys dancing in these weird patterns, and I'm thinking, whoa, those people are freaks. And I'm labeling, right? And then I start to go up in my own experience, and every one of my insecurities, oh my God, what would my mother think about what I'm doing right now? What would the people at synagogue think about this? Is my rabbi going to still let me into synagogue? I went through the gambit. And there is a point with psychedelia, this is still answering your question, Clay. There is a point in psychedelia where you either jump out of the airplane or you don't jump. And if you don't jump, you're about to have a very uncomfortable experience because all your fear, anxiety, everything that's come up is going to remain. Or you jump out of the airplane, you say, excuse my language, you say, fuck it, and you surrender. And it's in that surrender that the beauty happens. I became aware of all my insecurities. Like that slide said, I'm fat, I'm ugly, nobody loves me. I became aware of all of those things at 13 years old, and it was just weighing on me, until I said, you know what? I need to dance. I need to dance. I don't know what those weird people are, and I don't know how they're doing that, but I need to do that. I need to move my body. And suddenly when I did, my experience was magical. People were coming up, welcome to the family. And I'm like, the family, oh my God, my parents are so pretentious. These people are loving and accepting me. Welcome to the family. Wow. And I remember so vividly dancing with joy in my heart and my soul, a joy that I'd never known, being, of money and appearances. That was all fractured and shattered. And I remember the next part, which was a mantra playing out. The concert ended. And my head was going, it can't be over. This was amazing. How could this be over? And I'm probably repeating this like in a Tourette kind of way. And the person next to me says, no, man, it's not over. They're playing here again tomorrow night. So I didn't manage to make it home that night. And I ended up, having just had my bar mitzvah, I ended up on tour with the Grateful Dead for the balance of the summer. I didn't call home once. I'm 13. I ended up out on the West Coast. I was in California. I was on the street. I was sleeping in cars. I was panhandling. I was selling pipes. Anything. I mean, I was dancing, living, loving, free. And I came home at the end of the summer and I said, Mom, Dad, I love you so much. I'm sorry I was gone. I need you to understand that I was getting rid of all my insecurities of self, that I was learning to love myself, and I was learning to dance. Mom, I'm learning to dance. My parents said, you're going to military school, son. And I ended up in the only Canadian military school for $30,000 a year that exists, Robert Land Military Academy, for the duration of my high school experience. So what happened to the other 20%, Clay? They ended up in military school. The other 20% didn't make it through the discomfort. And with those types of drugs, the only way out is in. Do you understand what I mean? Especially if you've hit a blockage. If you get blocked in a chakra, which is uncomfortable, take psychedelia out of it, and let's just talk about yoga. How many people know about Kundalini yoga? How many people have done Kundalini yoga? Have you ever attempted to raise Kundalini without first clearing your chakras? Yeah. Don't try that. And don't try that on psychedelics because it makes it way worse. But point is, you try to pierce chakras with Kundala. If you don't know what Kundalini yoga is, it is a practice which goes back to Ayurvedic medicine and the gurus and the yogis of India. And it is ultimately that there is an energy system, an energy bar, which can be awoken through the likes of a yogic practice and meditation where you increase through what's called the Sushman, the energy bar that connects all of your chakras. You ultimately are supporting a piercing and a connection where you, from the base of your spine, it's described as the serpent, you raise the serpent up to and through the chakras, and then she comes back down. And when Kundalini yoga has been done properly, your chakra system is connected for the first time, and therein rests gateways to different realms and awakening. But if you attempt to pierce those chakras and do so without first resolving the garbage that is within your chakra system, you're not going to find that a very comfortable experience. So I suspect, Clay, not that I can speak as an authority to it, but I suspect what happened to the other 20% was it hurt, they got stuck, and they didn't continue. That's what happened with the majority of my friends that ever had a bad trip. Anybody here ever had a bad trip? Yeah? Did you go back in again after, or did you leave it alone? And that's the other 20%. That's the other 20%. Because psychedelia will take your deepest, darkest, put it in front of your face, and you either choose to let go and fracture that, or you don't. 2 minutes, Andrew, and I'm done. Change perception, change reality. There is no break. Finishing what? Oh, finishing lottery. All right, I'm finishing now. So while mainstream research into psychedelia as medicine is in its infancy, the writing is on the wall. These medicines are the future of brain wellness. That is my opinion. And my theory, my hypothesis, is that through the use even of, in the same way that we stimulated hormones, through the usage of these frequencies, because we will use frequency-based representations. And again, I am by no means advocating drug use. Don't do drugs. I hypothesize that through stimulating these frequencies through your device as a precursive measure to then stimulating, in essence, I'm going to build a new highway and then I'm going to put a car on that highway and I'm going to ask it to drive. Right now it's a 2-lane highway. Oncoming traffic is very close. What I propose is we scrap the old highway, which sucks and isn't working, and we build a new freeway. Through the building of that freeway, multiple lanes, more pathways, more connections, and you saw the research. The connections are amazing. I propose that through the usage of these frequencies, we will have the ability to stimulate after detoxing specific areas, supporting specific areas. I propose that we are going to have the ability to light up the brain in a way that hasn't before, whereby once our highways are built, we can then go into using our super learning panels for stimulating communication, stimulating memory and concentration, stimulating math skills, stimulating emotional maturity skills, and be able to have a much more profound and accelerated hyperspeed effect to support exactly what it is we're looking to see the brain achieve. So protocols, as it applies, I know everybody wants to know the protocol pieces. Those will be given out. We're out of time. Those protocol pieces will be given out next week as to the steps, and I'm outlining very specifically phase 1, the detox steps for very specific brain detox. It'll be very easy to follow along. The circles, the texts, the pictures, so it won't be difficult, and you'll be able to email me at AM. Funny, AM as in wake up. Wow, love that. But it's also Adam Mandel. am@quantumclarity.net. I want your questions. I want your feedback in respect to the application of this theory and this hypothesis. am@quantumclarity.net. So I'm in my protocols going to show you phase 1 methods for going out and detoxing the brain in its very specific areas. For phase 2, where we're nutrifying and supporting the very specific areas of the brain. And for phase 3, how you're going to put it all together, apply the new I haven't yet named it. I need a really cool name. But the new buttons and the new remedies, which will be built into your next software update. And you already do have LSD and peyote in the matrix, so for the time being, we're going to just stimulate those. Oh, you didn't know that? Oh, yeah, it's really funny, too, because when LSD shows up, how many of you have ever seen LSD show up? And does it not show up on the matrix most often with, like, the little old lady who's clearly never done acid? Right? But you know what that little old lady is? Rigid in her thought. And every time I see LSD show up for a client, it isn't, oh my God, they must be toxic to LSD. It doesn't stay in the system like that. When I see LSD show up, it's because their mind, their brain, is looking for the fracture of old non-working pathways and rigid thinking and delusion, and looking to fracture that into multiple points of perception, which in essence, really, if you think about autism, like it's the ability to express yourself, like certainly the autism that shows up often for people on the device that are not autistic. In my experience, what's coming up is the device telling me that this person has a disconnect between how they feel and their ability to express it. Right? Well, in my experience, let's just blow that shit up. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Are there any questions? Yes. Not applicable because we're not doing physical substance, so I'm going direct into the brain. In respect to the blood-brain barrier, no, because I'm not giving you physical LSD, physical psilocybin, physical DMT. I'm stimulating the frequency. The frequency is going direct to the transmitter-receiver, and that's in your brain. Well, it's in the whole body and the body conscious, but the point is there is nothing to do with blood-brain barrier because I'm not using anything physical. Yes. What do I use? The question was, do I use the MindFit or Brain Tap or whatever it's called now? No, I don't. I don't like Patrick. And I can't stand him in my ears. But what I use is Bob Monroe's CDs, the HemiSync CDs, with a good set of headphones. You can buy them you can buy them online. Probably the cheapest is Amazoning it, I imagine. But HemiSync, Hemi, Hemi -sync. HemiSync. And you can buy specific stimulating CDs for alpha, beta, theta. And if you don't know what HemiSync is and its basis, Bob Monroe is the head of HemiSync. Bob Monroe ran the mind control programs for the Central Intelligence Agency in the 60s and then decided the government should not have access to this evil work. He started his own institute to support brain development and brain balance. So, yeah. Question? Bob Monroe. He also used to teach transcendental meditation. And you know what? That clap kind of sucked for the fact that I just proposed the usage of psychedelia and psilocybin. So do you want to actually do that properly, please? Deb, you still got the standing ovation. I know. You know what? Whatever. Next year you can MC the thing. Nah. If it's asked for, it doesn't matter. It had to be organic. I really believe that through my research personally, as well as the research that's being done, the application of this as a premise, you're going to see extraordinary things happen in tandem with working with speech development. So those protocols will be available for you next week for download. And please, I gave you my email. Send me your feedback.